You're about to meet the innovators and influencers who are restoring the Judeo-Christian foundations of our culture right here on The Patrick Coffin Show.
And now, here's your host, Patrick Coffin.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to the show. Happy to dig into this topic with Sohrab Ahmari. He's an editorial writer for the Wall Street Journal based in London. His writing has appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Weekly Standard, and many other publications on both sides of the Atlantic. He's testified before the British Parliament and appears regularly on television as well, including Sky News, the BBC, France 24, and the Fox Channel. He joins me now from London town. Hey, Sohrab, great to have you, sir.
Hey, Patrick, how are you?
Doing great. I'm happy to talk about your new book. I'll just throw it up in front of the camera here. It's called The New Philistines, and it's a mini Jeremiad. It's a rant for the ages about what went wrong with art and people's, their perceptions of what art is supposed to be, and the eclipse of the idea of objective beauty. The last time you and I spoke, you had entered the church, which you announced you were going to do the day that Father Jacques Hamel was martyred in Normandy. So you're still in the church. You didn't backslide. You're still with us.
And I was received in December, subsequent to when we talked. When we talked, right. I had announced but not been fully.
Oh, I see. That's right. That is the timeline. And you wrote your story in the Herald, so folks could follow up there. I'm going to put a little link to that story on patrickcoffin.media. So anyway, welcome to the church, fellow sinner. We need as many sinners as we can get. Your experience so far as a Catholic has been positive?
It's been great. It's been great, but also hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't noticeably increased my self-command as much as I'd like, but at least now I feel guilty for my failures of self-command.
Right on. Well, the Jews invented it. Catholics perfected it, right?
That's right. That's right.
The church has been the world's greatest patron of the arts, and I like to point this out to people who feel that they're on the cutting edge of the latest artistic. We're going to get into identitarian politics, but the most beautiful and the most painted image seems to me to be the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Christ Child. If you go to any art museum in any European city, you're going to see more pictures of the Blessed Mother than anyone else. And I think it's still true in art schools around the world that you're judged on your abilities based on your appreciation or your ability to study, if not replicate, pictures of the Blessed Virgin. Am I way off base here? But because when I go to art museums, which is not a lot, there seems to be an analogy with magicians. They say magicians are judged based on their ability to do the famous cups and balls. So, okay, fine, you can do card tricks, but let me see your cups and balls. There's something true about that with respect to the Blessed Mother, or pictures of her with her son.
And also of the scene at Calvary, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. So, absolutely, no, I don't think you're incorrect at all. And I think technical mastery is something that is very often tied to these classical images. I would say that the classical Roman and Greek statues and so forth are another aspect of that. And I don't want to say that it's all completely lost. I mean, I think we still teach and expect technical mastery in art schools, but probably not nearly enough, or not nearly as much compared to previous times.
I feel like I've got my art costume here on. I don't have a tie, but I do have the lapel, the pocket square. So I'm ready to talk about art in a serious way.
Okay.
The New Philistines, the cover caught my attention. People holding their smartphones up, photographing the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if they were looking at it as it's some kind of impressive exotic animal, or just commoditizing it like they would an interesting Coke sign in some Turkish town. What is that? Is that a scene from something?
Yeah, it's from the Louvre. These are actual museum goers at the Louvre who are. So there are two reasons why that's on the cover. One is the more immediate point of, I've always just found it amusing that people go to great museums and they see Velázquez or Caravaggio or the Mona Lisa or whatever, and they photograph it as though their own photograph of that painting is somehow some addition to it, But actually, the deeper point in this is that those people are not the Philistines that are referred to in the title, because they're still hungering for a sense of art as a vehicle to objective truth, to universal beauty, to what tickles the human soul. And they try to find it in places like the Louvre with the Mona Lisa. So the Philistines in the book are actually a lot of the contemporary art establishment, the people who run the prestige galleries, contemporary art institutes, journals, and so forth, who sneer at the idea of beauty. And by the way, sneering is one thing. It's not even on the radar anymore. So the cover of the book kind of gets at this idea that people hunger for truth, but the art world increasingly doesn't supply it, truth and beauty, and the art world still doesn't apply it. It gets at it, the cover, in a sort of oblique way.
Well, that's the rich irony of the title, right? A Philistine is someone who is artless, lowbrow, uncultured, can't appreciate art, and you're kind of turning that right side up, saying that the new purveyors of art with a capital A are the new Philistines, because they've jettisoned the traditional canon, the classic canon against which most art everywhere is judged. So the canon itself is out the door.
Yes.
So where are we? Is it chaos? You've got example after example of how things like the works of Shakespeare in the Sam Wanamaker's, hope I'm pronouncing the name right, his dedication to rebuilding the Globe Theatre in London, and how now you almost can't see a play by William Shakespeare without some politically correct lens attached to it. It has to be set in some exotic location. It has to have the text itself of the dialogue all changed around to serve another small g god, which we can get into. I've never been to the Globe, but I understand that in its initial reopening, it was just jaw-droppingly beautiful to be there and to see plays presented in the way that the Bard would have presented them.
Yes, and so when I moved to London from New York in 2014, and I immediately fell in love with the Globe because it gave me a chance. I mean, one encounters Shakespeare in this sporadic way. When you read some in high school, you might see a college production or two, and you get older and you see one or two productions here and there. But then with the Globe, it was an opportunity to see the full repertoire in these plays where the intention was a kind of originalism. So natural lighting, natural sound, very unfussy productions, and the focus was on the text. And so when you heard those famous lines, then suddenly you got this goosebumps and this sense of recognition of, what is the West, what is Shakespeare's the role, and this sort of continuous link from what was happening physically, geographically at the site of the original Globe to where you're sitting now, which is not far away from it, both physically and artistically. So what's replaced all of it, to go back to your original question, is once individuality is out and it's passé, and transcendence, or the quest for transcendence, is passé and out as well, and truth, beauty, rigor, aesthetic mastery, all these things are out. What's replaced it is just group politics. Not even politics that has any spirit to it, not any richness to it. It's just group grievance and group identity. So race, gender, sexuality, power, privilege. These are the themes of the art world. Not all art that's being made, but in the establishment, in the important museums in the three cities that matter most, Los Angeles, London, and New York, that's what holds sway.
How is Emma Rice's handling of the classic canon been a big game changer and symptomatic of this Philistinism that you're discussing in the book? And who's Emma Rice for people who outside?
so I mentioned the Globe. Emma Rice came in as the new artistic director of the Globe in spring 2016, and the artistic directors come in for decade-long tenures. And as soon as she came in with her original, or the first production that she picked was A Midsummer Night's Dream, this wonderful whimsical comedy about desire, and she basically, before even taking the job, said, I find Shakespeare to be boring. She said, when I listen to it, I get sleepy and I want to put on a radio soap opera. She said that the Shakespeare is somehow at the root of the sexism that's built into all Western theater. And so she sort of went to war with Shakespeare, and that it is boring, and that it can't possibly be relevant today. So I have to impose relevance on it. So what did that mean? It meant suggesting, for example, the fairy potion that alters people's desires in the play is actually a date rape drug. It also meant changing various lines, kind of injecting popular slang as though the original language needed her to sort of make it fresh and exciting for a 2016, 2017 audience. And by the way, an update since the book was written is that the Globe parted ways with her. Yeah. So they cut her. As I said, they come in for 10 years, but they let her go by. She'll only have one more year or something.
Well, this is otherwise known as gilding the lily, right?
Yeah.
Spray painting a flower with a flower spray paint instead of just letting it be its own beautiful self.
Exactly. Well, and the excuse I shouldn't say the excuse, but the reasoning that the Globe's board used wasn't that she was bringing all this relentless PC politics, all actors on stage have to be 50-50 gender balance, all of that stuff. They said it was because she used amplifiers, whereas they had always wanted a place where it was natural sound and natural lighting. So that was, but I sensed, I think I wasn't the only one who sensed that was the way that they could get rid of her without inviting charges of sexism and backwardness.
And then she would have been a prophetess, fulfilling the very thing she was complaining about. Well, the Globe is not run as a missionary outfit, right? It's a business. They want to get tourists and other seats in those chairs, and if they're being relentlessly propagandized by a narrow leftist agenda, people don't want to see. They want to go to be entertained. They want to laugh. They want to cry. They want to just drink in the sound of that elevated language that Shakespeare is and represents. That's what I think people are hungry for. I think they're hungry for the thing itself, not some bastard or Bowdlerized version of it.
Well, I mean, initially her sales were pretty high. I mean, her ticket sales, I think that's partly because people want to say, oh, what's the new artistic director up to? But also when you do some of this gimmicky type stuff, it's called a gimmick for a reason, in the sense that it does initially attract people. And, the wider art and theater establishment in London was prepared to have this narrative that that Shakespeare is at the root of our sexist crimes, that he's one of the dead white men who sewed rape culture into the fabric of Western civilization and now needs to be demolished. And who better to do it than this woman who disdains him openly? So there was some attraction to that. But what I suspect is that had it gone on, then the numbers would have dropped off. But to be fair to her, and that at least commercially, she was initially relatively successful. But I do think that that would have gone down as people got tired of gimmickry, as they tend to do.
If you're hating the source material and you're creating works to subvert the premises of the artist, it's hard to sustain an audience over time, to keep returning to the same agenda.
To be sure.
Now, London is sort of it's ground zero. I guess that term has been co-opted by 9/11. More the main fortress of live theater performance seems to me to be London, and then Broadway, of course. But London seems to be the classical bar against which other live theater is taking place. I'm quite enamored with, just changing gears a little bit from live theater to television. My wife and I have binge watched Downton Abbey. I'm in touch with Julian Fellows, who is now writing the prequel called The Gilded Age, but I hope to connect with him. Yeah, it's the young Lord Grantham and all the American stuff that happened long before World War I hit. Yeah. Being in the United States, I don't know how Downton Abbey went over with the New Philistines in English circles. Was it similarly wrapped for simply depicting a much more robust Christian civilization and a more, what's the way to put it, the class system in England much more sturdily in place in the past, before World War I and between the wars? Are English folk likely to want to jettison this royalist identity in favor of more egalitarian, quasi-American, or is it looked on as something that people really like to watch?
Well, I don't know the show at its height. When it was at its height, I was still living in the U.S., so I don't remember the cultural conversation that followed. What I will say is, more generally, that my experience has been that stuff, that some element of the old class society, and the fascination and deep reverence, certainly for the royal family and the court more broadly, is still, I think it's at the root of English, not necessarily for all British people, but certainly for English people, is still a very strong force. I don't think that it's is under threat in any way, as far as the broad masses go, so to speak. Who knows about intelligence?
You said broad, Sohrab. That's sexist. So please, shut up. I'm just.
You should give it a trigger warning.
I'll go make myself a cruelty-free quinoa smoothie. Portia and Rosalind and Lady Macbeth, you point out, are very strong, independent, fearsome, even women, which makes trying to feminize is this a word? Feministize Shakespeare an odd endeavor, because there are themes that scratch itchy ears to moderns already in Shakespeare, proving that human nature is not some fluid thing. We are what we are, and we were in the 15th and 16th centuries.
So
yeah, go ahead.
Two good points there, I think, that I heard. One is this unchanging nature of mankind or humankind, which is my own greatest attraction to Shakespeare, because in Shakespeare and a few other sources, so for me, Tolstoy as well, you go and you see that people don't change, that fundamentally certain things about people, fallenness and their capacity for redemption and for repentance and conscience, are universal and so when you encounter great art in any medium, for me it's like this realization that people have always been the same. And that includes women. That includes women who are ambitious, who although not equal in every way to men, have their own, are complementary to them, and can be quite cunning as well as any of the characters in the Shakespearean canon. So this idea that but for Emma Rice and people like her rescuing Shakespeare from his own hopeless sexism or whatever is wrong. And as those characters, I'm trying to think of others, not many come to mind, but those were the three that I picked out in the book as strong, cunning, dangerous women, not in need of a liberal arts style safe space for them to find their own voice. They have their own voice.
I ain't no Shakespearean scholar, but when I read the history of that era and I read about Shakespeare's worldview, particularly through people like Joseph Pearce, who makes a very good case that Shakespeare was a serious Catholic. It seems that his brand of art, and I'm just using Shakespeare as an example of someone who is a genius at communicating the human condition and our need for hope and, as you say, the capacity for redemption. That sounds to me like small a art that the average person, the groundling segment of the population, loved. They rejoiced in. They could laugh, they could cry, and have a vicarious experience of live theater. And now art seems to have acquired a capital A, and it's been truncated into a little echo chamber represented, as you discuss in the book, art forum. So now it's an elitist thing. It used to be populist or popular, appealing to the people, but now it seems to have been hijacked by the elites. Am I reading the tea leaves correctly?
I think to some extent the artists and intellectuals have always sort of apart from their own societies, and that's been and walked that line of appealing to a popular audience and being recognized for their greatness, sometimes after the fact, because at the time the formal innovations that they were bringing about were seen as heretical or unpopular, and then generations on, people were like, wow, he was doing great things, whoever he or she might be. So what I would say is that what's elitist about these people is, I wish they were elitist in that sense of saying, I am going to search after the truth and beauty, whatever the cost, and whether people like it or not. Mm-hmm. I actually think their elitism is actually a kind of in-crowd conformity.
Right.
I mean, I think a true elitist artist or critic wouldn't care for any of that, right? That's the sort of art for art's sake, I'm just going to do whatever. I admire that more. Even if I'm in the 20th century, I don't admire all of sort of modernism. At least it had some of that. More so than this kind of where the answers are already given. If you know a certain lingo, you go to the art galleries and they have these curators notes. They say, this it explores my intersectionality as a transgender subject of capitalism oppressed by heteropatriarchal blah blah blah. It's actually not that radical. The easiest thing you can do to gain acceptance in the art world is to affix some of these labels to your artwork and say, this is about anti-capitalist trans blah blah blah. And you know what I mean? So I wish they were elitist in the sense of ruthless search for truth and beauty. They're not. It's just a bunch of they're unbelievably conformist, actually.
And it's all relentlessly ironic. You can't. It's like when I was a younger, callow young man, I used to hate country music, and now I know why. Now that I'm older, and I've got a husband and a dad. Country music, especially the ballads, they're so guileless. They're so sweet. There's an innocence, a kind of a straightforwardness. And so if you want to make yourself feel important or intellectual, you don't like that. That has to be disdained. So everything has to be ironic. And the other word, I thought you were going to say the word heteronormativity, which is one of my favorite buzzwords. And another word that jumped out because you cite people who use it a lot in art forum is discursive. Don't leave home without discursive, right?
Sorry, I forgot about discursive.
Yeah.
But the guile thing, the guilelessness of country music, for me, I think of that in the sense of movies. Mm-hmm. People ask me, you hate so much of the sort of film theory type film. I mean, in the sense of what I describe in the book of these sort of very rarefied, small audience type art house films.
Yeah. And you have to pronounce it film, right?
Film. So they're like, what do you like? And I said, actually, I think partly, I hate to say this, but I think in Hollywood you will find more just genuinely mesmerizing imagery. There might be a great deal of vulgarity and whatever in it, but at least partly because it faces commercial pressures, in Hollywood movies, you'll find a lot more beautiful imagery, and making a movie on Hollywood terms where it has a tightly paced script in which you have protagonists who go through the movie, and gradually the stakes are raised for them until it all comes to a satisfying conclusion. Writing a script like that is really, really hard. And by forcing people to work within those conventions, and if they make some political point, they have to do it within those narrative conventions, actually disciplines them. And there's a lot better stuff in Hollywood, as far as I'm concerned, not only entertaining and not utterly boring, but also genuinely beautiful than in the art house, serious cinema type place. I always say Interstellar. I don't know if you saw that movie, but I just thought I did. Unbelievable. I mean, that's the most beautiful piece of art I've encountered as far as recently than anything in a European art house.
Maybe you can explain the end to me. We'll have you back and just talk about Act 3 of Interstellar. Because I wondered if that kind of a story could be told better or at all in a book. Because I know Nolan's movie Inception, I think, is not bookable. I mean, that you have to see that 40 feet tall. The dream within a dream within a dream, which is pretty, mesmerizing presuppositions, hard to pull off in a novel. But I agree. Nowadays, the audience almost has to be, if not beaten over the head with gnarly potty words and ultra violence, or it has to be stunningly beautiful. And this reminds me of that line you mentioned, Tolstoy. I believe it's a line that Dostoevsky puts in one of the characters in The Idiot, and the character says, "In the future, man will be saved by beauty." So there's an evangelical power to beauty, it seems to me, that's not in the audience. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of the greatest lies of Satan is the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, it might be, but it's first in the object that's being beheld.
Yes.
And if you think beauty is just in the eye of the beholder, then you're in a subjectivist swamp where the only reality is my thoughts, my own little micro universe. And then then you can and I can't say what beauty is at all.
Yeah. No, I one of the premises of the book is that there is such a thing as objective beauty that's within the art object, not because of social conventions, not because of power hierarchies, not because of capitalism, whatever, and gender norms and racism. No, there's a universal standard of beauty. It's really complicated to say what's beautiful, and I actually have very broad taste. I'm willing to debate all sorts of particular pieces. Mm-hmm. But the basic premise that beauty itself is not a function of ideology or of politics is kind of a revolutionary thing to say nowadays, because any assertion of beauty in the art forum crowd, in the art establishment, is an assertion of power, of, well, who decides, because it's powerful people who run the galleries, and it's wealthy white men who founded our culture, so they set the terms of what's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Just to circle back to the opening of our conversation, for me, it's the Mass itself that drew me first to Catholicism. So it was the beauty. It was the beauty of the Gloria and the sung preface before the Sanctus and so forth. Like that, so it's an opening to the truth, at least. Beauty insofar as it's reflected in the Catholic Mass. So the stakes for me personally are very high in the debate over whether beauty is objective or not.
How much of that experience walking into the Divine Liturgy was shaded or accented by music?
A lot of it. I mean, I don't have a connoisseur's ear. I mean, I like things, but I will say that so the church that where I decided to start going to Mass for complicated reasons, which I won't mention it, but one day I was walking by it and it said sung high solemn Latin Mass, and it said on the bottom music by Mozart, Bach, and I can't remember who the third composer was, that was interwoven into the into the just regular Mass.
Probably not Simon and Garfunkel, I'm guessing.
So music was a huge part of it. I mean, with an amateur's ear, but I thought, yeah, I prefer this to a certain kind of liturgy that involves, kind of a quasi rock concert.
In which you're lifted outside yourself, not tempted at all to worship yourself, as some modern liturgical music seems to convey. Well, the extraordinary form Mass is certainly an exotic animal. It's aesthetically unlike any other experience. It's not a performance, really. It's an act in which, and this is excuse me, another irony, that the role of the priest is paradoxically not that important. The personality of the priest really doesn't matter. In fact, it's an entirely different direction. And no, the priest's back is not to the people. Everyone is, facing east, worshiping the Lord together. But that's
he subsumes himself to this,
what's that?
The priest subsumes himself to this great process. It's not. He's not a. It doesn't matter who it is, in a way. So in a way, it's a small s sacrifice as the big S sacrifice is going on.
Do you find that in the UK context now that an area that used to be famous for, just using Ireland as an example, it was a factory of missionaries, and so you had Irish missionaries and people from all over the UK evangelizing the rest of the world. Now it seems to be missionary territory itself.
In need of evangelization. I was just in Dublin recently, and boy, it's depressing as far as the state of the church. Well, I mean, now they have a huge battle coming up in Ireland. I don't know if you know, but it's their amendment against their pro-life amendment that's under Constitution is under attack from pro-abortion forces.
A matter of time, and like with marriage, they'll be outgunned about 20-1 with advertising money.
They're outgunned money-wise, and the culture is against them, and there's this historic animosity against the church, partly because the church was so bound up with the state in Ireland. But there's revival elsewhere. I think in the French election, you see there's talk of a revival of Catholicism. In the person of Fillon. It's unfortunate he turned out to have these ethical issues. But I don't, I mean, the man himself, whatever it may be, I don't think that process is going away. And in Poland as well, is as strong as ever. Ireland is a very sad case. It's interesting you mentioned, because I just happened to have been there recently, and I had the same impression as what you said. Yeah,
I was there 2 years ago, and I delighted in hanging out I was there with as a leader of a Catholic pilgrimage, and I made a point of spending time in Irish pubs. I perform magic, so I'll lay in some magic, and that gets attention, which is a great door opener to talk about faith and wonder and what's a miracle and all that. And hearing these young Irishmen and Irish women unspool about their experiences as ex-Catholics, they've all made their sacraments and so on, but they don't darken the doors to a church. And one young man said something very interesting. I thought it was an honest assessment of his generation. He said, "We're out from under the authority of the Catholic Church, but we don't know whose authority we're under now." So, it's liberty from, but to do what? Now what, right? What do we do with our liberation? Do you think there's some tectonic shifts in the world in light of, and I have to use the word Donald Trump here, in light of the Trump election in America? Are there ripple effects in the art world? In other words, is there a kind of an artistic Brexit thing where ordinary people want to see the classics? They don't want this, arcane, politicized, identitarian kind of art. They just want the classics that the average person loves if you wake them up in the middle of the night. Does this question make sense?
It does. On the one hand, I think Trump will usher in 8 years of artistic misery because, as with the Bush years, suddenly the art establishment will, as politicized as it is, it'll get exponentially more politicized, and you'll see all sorts of Trump-related critical art. And it's not that I don't even care that it criticizes Trump. It's just that it's so politicized and boring.
Yeah.
So you'll see that. On the other hand, that other process that you're talking about of this awakening and hunger, that's not even it's not even a new thing. I mean, it's been going on for a while. Camille Paglia, who's a critic I really admire, you should have her on your show. She's fascinating.
She and I are emailing. Actually, funny you bring her up. It's weird. I'm not sure if Camille's watching this now, but I had a dream about her last night because she's got her new book on sex and gender and identity. I forget the name of it. It's got a snappy Pagliolarian title, but I find her endlessly readable, and she
says though, and it's true, is that reporting my own book, I sort of discovered that it's true, is that when museums put on the retrospectives of Renaissance greats or Hellenic sculpture or some of the best of 20th century modernism, they sell out, and lines across will form outside. And when they do this sort of go to the Tate Modern or the new wing of the Tate Modern, it's just empty, it's barren, it's a wasteland. You hear the tumbleweeds.
You don't have people doing this with their smartphones, taking pictures of Jackson Pollock or Andres Serrano or any of these crazy radicalized so-called artists. It's the power of objective beauty. I mean, they want to soak it in. Any of those people could easily buy a print. You can practically get one at any 7-Eleven now. The Mona Lisa is everywhere, and yet seeing the real thing, there's something altering about it. I had the same experience looking at the Shroud of Turin, which I'd seen 1,000 times in pictures, but it wasn't until I walked into that church in Turin and I beheld the thing itself. It was very arresting and beautiful in its own kind of macabre way. Yeah. Isn't that true that some beauty has an element of raw ugliness? I'm thinking of Hacksaw Ridge and the other Gibson film. What is it about the guy from Nazareth? Oh yeah, The Passion of the Christ.
Yes.
That thing. Every frame is like a Caravaggio print. It's just, it's simultaneously terrifying and beautiful.
Totally, and to be very clear, for when I say beauty and that I talk about objective beauty, I don't mean that the subject has to be conventionally beautiful. Like, why don't we just go back to just painting lakes with ducks and geese or anything like that? I mean, the beautiful can be, the subject can be raw, and it can be, as you said, it can be the death of God on screen, and it can be the most horrifying thing. So just to be clear, I mean, I'm not saying let's return to some just idyllic, pastoral imagery, anything like that. This is a very good point. Yeah.
There's a film I would recommend if you've never seen it, and people watching and listening. It's from Australia, and it's based on a play called Speaking in Tongues. And it's called, Andrew Bovell's the writer, and the movie version is called Lantana, with Jeffrey Rush and Barbara Hershey and Anthony LaPaglia. And it's a magnificent, ultimately pro-marriage, pro-faithfulness film through the lens of adultery. And it's 3 storylines that kind of wrap around. And there's another example of a movie that I could recommend with some caveats to conservative pious brethren. But if you take that journey with those characters, there's an enormous amount of truth about that marriage is worth it. It's a difficult adventure. And so that one of the characters says at one point, love isn't enough. Now that's heresy to our moderns, where love is everything. But people don't distinguish between LOVE and LUV, right? Which is a problem.
I'll have to watch that, Lantana.
Yeah, Lantana. Yeah. Check out the trailer; it's very good.
For sure.
I've in pondering the creators of art and how their own lives often show up in kind of sideways, autobiographical ways in the art itself. I've noticed that pagans, lapsed Catholics, and secular Jews make better Christian films than intentional Christian films, which tend to be predictable and a bit cardboardy and two-dimensional. Have you noticed that? This twisted mystic thing out there where people they what's that?
Did you like Silence? Speaking of
I have. God bless me and keep me. I have not, as of this this interview, I have not seen it yet. I've come very close. Okay. I would like to. I'm reading the book. I'm reading the book. What's that?
I think it just goes to your point.
Yeah.
Then you're right. Although that was even the case. I think Caravaggio had a tumultuous life, very fallen life, right? But he was also, in his own way, very devout. So, and that tension makes for wonderful art. Wonderful art.
They're kind of the DNA of their own longing for the fullness shows up in their art, and that's what resonates with people who are watching it. I came across a great quote by Frank Capra. Now, Frank Capra to me is very illustrative of art for the masses that was loved by every man. And the line is, when I was it's from his autobiography called The Name Above the Title. When I was a young director, I thought that drama was when the actors cry, but I realized that drama is when the audience cries.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so we kind of project into, the everyman. And often the more powerful emotional scenes are not the scenes where the actor loses it and, weeps, but stays on the edge, and you identify with that staying on the edge. And then if you add the beauty of people like Hans Zimmer or Ennio Morricone or John Williams, then it's a recipe for a life changer. Again, even if the experiences being recounted in the film or in the book or in the art are difficult. Schindler's List, for instance. I like to joke that it's one of his more subtle comedies. So your take on Silence, speaking of gnarly art that's beautiful.
I thought it was astonishing. Partly because, Scorsese has been making kind of the same film for 2 decades now. Goodfellas, Casino, even the same soundtrack. It was always Gimme Shelter, would blast, and then a series of flashbacks and voiceovers and blah, blah, blah. And this was just a break from all of that.
Yeah.
And it was a powerful experience. And there's this debate now, among some Catholic viewers, that it's a license to apostasy. I don't think so. I think that's very simplistic reading. I think it's a very, very powerful movie about how faith manifests itself under conditions of persecution. And I really highly recommend it.
Well, Susaku Endo is called the Graham Greene of Japan. And if the movie's out, then the book has also got to be out. And it's been in since it came out, I think in 1967. And so the fact that... What's that? Yeah.
Enormously popular, yeah.
Well, Sohrab, we can drill deep. I hope you come back. There's
Totally.
a lot of so many tributaries off the main river to explore. I do hope you come back. I'm loving. I'm just about finished the book. It's called The New Philistines. Sohrab Ahmari joining us from London. Best place to get connected to the book?
Just Amazon.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be doing a show note about this conversation, and I'll put a link there at patrickcoffin.media. Wonderful book, great topic, and thanks for being a gift. Great to spend time with you.
Patrick, be well.
All right, you as well. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?